Mountaintop experiences are phenomenal, but they are not forever. And we need to remember that. In other words, immediately following that mountaintop experience, that amazing experience of the coming kingdom and the glory of Jesus, they return to the harsh realities of a fallen, evil world. You see, apparently, the 9 disciples who remained at the base of the mountain had been unable to cast this demon out of this man's son. Sin pulls the power of God away from you. When you don't pray, you have no access to power. It's like having some kind of a machine that's got a plug on it, and you don't plug it in, and you can't figure out why it doesn't work. And the father cried out, good for him. He said, I do believe, help my unbelief. Here was a dad that wasn't going to take no for an answer. He knew his kid was in trouble. He knew something was wrong. He knew he was messed up, and he knew the only hope for him was Jesus. They didn't want any more bad news. They didn't want any more valley experiences. Welcome to the club. No one would stand up this morning and go, could I have a fresh valley experience? Are you in a valley right now? If we have Jesus, not only can we have victory in the valley, we will have victory in the valley. Chuck Colson served as special counsel to President Richard Nixon from 1969 to 1973. He was known as Nixon's hatchet man. He pleaded guilty to charges related to Watergate in 1974. He served 7 months in prison. Because of that experience, Colson became a Christian 2 years later, 1976. He founded Prison Fellowship, the largest, most effective prison ministry in the world. Colson wrote more than 30 books, the most famous of which was his memoir, Born Again. I'd just like to know this morning, how many of you have read his memoir, Born Again? Raise your hands. Okay, a few folks have. It's a great book. He donated all of his book royalties and all of his speaking fees to Prison Fellowship. 30 years ago, in 1987, he wrote a book called Kingdoms in Conflict. And listen to what he said in that book, quote, never before has the conflict between church and state been so widespread or had such far-reaching implications for every citizen, end quote. I wonder what he'd write today, 30 years later. He warned religious leaders and those who would attempt to obliterate all religious influence from society. He said, quote, much of the conflict is the result of misunderstanding. The problem is that humanists fail to understand human nature, and Christians fail to understand Christ's teaching about his kingdom, end quote. And he wrote about those kingdoms in conflict. He said, I vividly recall a glimpse from my White House days, one brisk December night as I accompanied the president from the Oval Office in the West Wing of the White House to the residence. Mr. Nixon was musing about what people really wanted in their leaders. He slowed a moment, looking into the distance across the South Lawn, and he said, the people really want a leader a little bigger than themselves, don't they, Chuck? I agreed, he said. I mean, someone like de Gaulle, he continued. There's a certain aloofness, a power that's exuded by great men that people feel and want to follow, end quote. That was before Colson's humbling at Watergate and his subsequent conversion. Colson went on to say, Jesus Christ exhibited none of this self-conscious aloofness. He served others first. He spoke to those to whom no one spoke. He dined with the lowest members of society. He touched the untouchables. He had no throne, no crown, no bevy of servants or armored guards. A borrowed manger and a borrowed tomb framed his earthly life. Kings and presidents and prime ministers surround themselves with minions who rush ahead and swing the doors wide and stand at attention as they wait for the great to pass. Jesus said that he himself stands at the door and knocks, patiently waiting to enter our lives, end quote. Dr. Kent Hughes said, Colson is right. True greatness is the antithesis of pride and exclusivity. Yet many churchgoers, and indeed many Christians, do not know this, as evidenced by the strutting leaders they choose to follow, and even more, the pride and narrowness that characterize their own lives and to which they actually aspire. Dr. Hughes said, today in some quarters of organized Christianity, the church simply does not believe Jesus' words. End quote. The same subject is taking place in our text this morning. Luke chapter 9, beginning in verse 46. Would you stand for the reading of God's word this morning? Luke says an argument arose among them as to which of them was the greatest. But Jesus, knowing the reasoning of their hearts, took a child and put him by his side and said to them, whoever receives this child in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives him who sent me. For he who is least among you all is the one who is great. John answered, Master, we saw someone casting out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he does not follow with us. But Jesus said to him, do not stop him, for the one who is not against you is for you. You may be seated, and may God add his blessing to the reading of his word. Our text begins with an argument. Luke says, an argument arose among them as to which of them was the greatest. How timely for us with the past few days that we've experienced here in America. You know, I'm always amazed. We started our study of the Gospel of Luke. It'll be 2 years this coming Easter that we would be in this text today after an entire week of a national argument. And really at issue is who's the greatest, if you think about it. Who's right? That's impossible for men to plan that out, but it's not impossible with God. In fact, that's the way God operates. His word, the Bible, Hebrews 4:12, is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing to the division of soul and of spirit, and of joints and of marrow, and discerning the thoughts and intentions of the heart. If you have a Bible in your hands, you're holding a book that is more up to date, as if it was even written just as you walked into the service. And it's alive. And if you'll read it, it will change you. And it can change our world. Dr. Fred Craddock said, and I quote, the argument among the disciples about greatness is ugly and inappropriate. For it is comparative and competitive, destroying their unity. You know, I wish sometimes in the media or someone in Washington, an adult would show up and tell the junior high boys to sit down and shut your mouth. I mean, come on. He said it diverts their praise from God to themselves, and it introduces into the circle of Jesus' followers a criteria of greatness that is totally foreign to the reign of God. Now, he said we can only speculate as to the cause of the quarrel. Maybe it was the special experience reserved for Peter, James, and John, or their recent successes when on mission, or locating blame for their failure with the demoniac boy, or perhaps they have now lost the distinction between being called and having credentials, end quote. Now, when I read that quote by Dr. Craddock, I had this carnal thought. And, I try to live for the Lord and love the Lord and do the best I can, but every once in a while I think like you do. Stay with me. You were about ready to judge me, and then all of a sudden you went, well, let's hear this. I'd like to know who started the argument. Wouldn't you? I mean, in fact, if we had statues of all the 12 apostles up here today, and we voted, my guess is that most of us would vote that Peter was the one that started the argument, right? Leaders are always the ones who get picked on and get the blame. Mark tells us the setting for the scene was Capernaum. Located on the northern tip of the Sea of Galilee, many of our people in our church have actually stood there. In fact, we're getting ready to take another group in November. In fact, if you're going with us to the Holy Land in November, there's a meeting Tuesday night, 7 o'clock in the Grand Hall. You need to be there, get final instructions. But we'll stand there in Capernaum. And that's where this took place. It's where Jesus' headquarters for his entire Galilean ministry, right there in Capernaum. But now in the Gospel of Luke, Luke's getting ready to tell us that that ministry was ending in Galilee. And in verse 51, he sets his face toward Jerusalem. And the rest of the book, the remaining 14 chapters, deal with Jesus heading to Jerusalem. To do what? Die on a cross for our sins. Mark 9:33 tells us that this incident also took place in a house, most likely Peter's house. Those who've been to the Holy Land, you've seen that place, the remnants of it. In verse 46, Luke says, in that house, in that place, an argument arose among them as to which of them was the greatest. Now, we don't know who started it, but we do know they all participated in it. These 12 men have been given elite status thanks to the grace of God. I mean, they weren't just disciples, they were apostles. And think about it for a moment. They could heal the sick. They could cast out demons, but are you ready for this? They could raise the dead. That's pretty heady stuff. But you dare not let what God blesses you with go to your head. And yet they did. For 3 of them, it went even further, having the privilege to go up on the mountain with Jesus. But you know what privilege can often do? Privilege can often lead to pride. And pride, according to one commentator, is the defining sin of fallen human nature, the soil in which all other sins sprout, take root, and grow. Pride was the sin that set on fire the angelic rebellion in heaven and sought to take God off the throne of the universe. Now think about this for a moment. Do you really believe that anyone can take God off the throne of the universe? Not unless you're full of pride. And when you're full of pride, you don't think straight. When you're full of pride, you don't walk straight. When you're full of pride, you're nuts. Pride is what produced the sin of Adam and Eve. Pride has been called the mother of all sins. C.S. Lewis wrote this about pride. He said, quote, there is one vice of which no man in the world is free. The more we have it in ourselves, the more we dislike it in others. It is a completely anti-God state of mind. Pride. St. Augustine said it was pride that changed angels into devils. So like trash-talking football players before the game, here are Jesus' 12 apostles arguing about who is the greatest. Now here's the problem. A, they weren't football players. B, this was no game. These were the 12 men that Jesus was entrusting with the task of reaching the world with the gospel. Pride always turns every situation into a sad situation. So Jesus gave them an answer. Verse 47. Mark tells us he walked up and said, hey, what are you guys talking about? Have you ever done that when some people are talking and all of a sudden they all get quiet? Okay, I got your tongue. What happened? Y'all were talking and he stopped. Now, he didn't walk up because he didn't know. He didn't ask that question because he didn't know what they were saying. He's omniscient. He knows everything. He wanted them to go ahead and say what you've been saying with him right there. You know, most of us live our lives without the awareness of the presence of Jesus being with us. That's why we can go the places we go, say the things we say, treat people the way we treat them, engage in things that we engage in because we have no awareness of the presence of Jesus with us. But if you're a Christian, wherever you go, he goes. And you know, if we had to repeat what we'd been saying, if we had to do again what we'd been doing, if we had to go to that place again, in the very presence of Jesus, we'd be silent too. We're good. We're good. So they were embarrassed. And rightly so. They were silent, and rightly so. Now, Matthew's account tells us in Matthew 18, verse 1, that they even asked Jesus, so Jesus, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Now, before you're ready to say, are you kidding me? You need to know that we all do that too. You ever said, well, like you're playing ping pong and there's an argument, a dispute over the point? Don't sit there and act all spiritual and act like you've never done this. Well, God knows that hit the table, you know. Same thing. God knows I was right. God will settle this one day. It's pride. Well, instead of engaging in their absurd debate, Jesus enlists the help of a child. Most scholars believe it could have even been one of Peter's children. Now, a child was the smallest, most powerless person in all of Hebrew culture. Darrell Bach, the commentator, said, and I quote, in Judaism, children under 12 could not be taught the Torah, and so to spend time with them was considered a waste. So when Jesus enlists the help of a child to answer an argument, it would have seemed bizarre. But quite the opposite, it was genius, as everything he does is. In verse 48, as he held the child, he said to them, whoever receives this child in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives him who sent me. For he who is least among you all is the one who is great. He said, you see, instead of reviewing their achievements and their accomplishments, instead of updating their resume, instead of changing their profile to reflect all the things they'd done on Facebook, they should have been humbling themselves like little children. In fact, Matthew says in Matthew 18, verses 3 and 4, that Jesus said, truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. You see, childlike humility is the only way to greatness in God's kingdom. Not childish comparisons, not competitions over who's the greatest. But you know what destroys all that? Pride. Pride drives people to exalt themselves and their own agendas. Pride causes ordinary people to become overly ambitious and desperate for the praise and recognition of men. It causes people to scratch and claw for the top in a relentless attempt at achieving greatness marked by position and possessions and the number of people who serve them. Everyone wants to be recognized. Every one of you do. So one of the reasons why for years, part of my regular routine is to speak to every young person I see walking down here to preach. Every one of them. In fact, if they don't respond back with a smile or good morning or whatever, I'll stand there for a minute and might say something about their shirt or whatever. So that's not going to make that big a difference. Oh, it's going to make a huge difference. You see, every one of those kids who sat in that hallway for years, they're going to remember that old preacher always took time to say hi to me. Just to acknowledge I'm there. You know how many people in our society would just like someone to acknowledge I'm here? I'm here. We told our widows and widowers a couple years ago, we had a big banquet for them, and I just told them that night, we know you're here. And we're going to take care of you. And I asked that night, how many of you need help with something around your house? Every home, every hand in the place went up. Some of you were there. I said, we're going to help every one of you. And to the best of our ability, we have tried every way we can to take care of our widows and widowers. In fact, our Saturday day of service, this Saturday, if you come and serve with us, you may most likely get to go to the home of a widow or widower, or maybe it's yard work, or maybe it's helping clean a house or something, to take care of them, because the Bible says, take care of the orphans and the widows in their affliction. That's real religion. That's what we're supposed to do. Let them know they're here. Everyone wants some recognition. Everyone wants to be recognized when they do something that makes a difference. And the devil knows that, and so he injects a little bit of pride into us. And so we enhance our Facebook picture to make ourselves look better than we really are. And we embellish whatever story we're telling so we're the hero of the story, and we try to get it out there. And yet the Bible, Proverbs, Solomon said, let your praise be in another man's mouth. But I want people to know what I've done. I want people to know I matter. Let your praise be in another man's mouth. But no one recognizes what I'm doing. No one sees what I'm doing. That's okay. You let your praise be in another man's mouth. Don't get caught up in pride. Pride drives people to do unbelievable things. And so Jesus said to them, the one who is least among you all, he is the one who is great. Well, in verse 49, in light of what Jesus said, John wondered about a recent situation they'd encountered, and he said, well, Master, we saw someone casting out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he does not follow with us. In other words, he's not one of us. He's not our group, and so we told him, you need to stop, but we couldn't stop him. So you know what Jesus does? He answers with an aphorism. Now, I know right now you're all looking down at your smartphone going, I got to figure out what an aphorism is. No, I'll tell you, okay? I'll save you some time. An aphorism is a pithy observation that states a principle or a truth in a witty manner or a witty fashion. Jesus said to him, do not stop him, for the one who is not against you is for you. That's an aphorism. Let me help you out. Here are some aphorisms you may recognize. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's an aphorism. If you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always got. That's an aphorism. Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's an aphorism. Here's another one. A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Now, I got to tell you, I've never gotten that one. Why would I ever want a bird in my hand or two? Why would I care if there's two in the? It just doesn't make sense to me. Don't come up afterwards to explain it either. I don't really want to know, okay? Here's another aphorism. Give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day. Teach a man to fish and he'll buy a boat, all kinds of fishing equipment, and he'll be gone every weekend. No, I made that part up. Sorry. Here's one. If you lie down with dogs, you wake up with fleas. That's a good one. Here's another one. This is an Oklahoma aphorism. I grew up with this one. A dog can lick a skunk, but it's not worth the stink. It's an aphorism. John, who was one of the sons of thunder, that's what Jesus nicknamed him. He said, we tried to stop him because he wasn't one of us. Did you know that jealousy and envy are the two ugly stepsisters of pride? John Claypool wrote about his experience in seminary, where he witnessed sinful competitiveness. Listen to this. He said, I can still recall going to state and national conventions in our denomination and coming home feeling drained and unclean. Because most of the conversation in the hotel rooms and the halls was characterized either by envy of those who were doing well or scarcely concealed delight for those who were doing poorly. For did that not mean that someone was about to fall and thus create an opening higher up the ladder? End quote. I haven't written about it, but I would tell you the same thing still goes on today. Sadly. Dr. Kent Hughes said the problem's not just ministerial, it's congregational. How do we feel when others ascend to positions of responsibility and we do not? Or when someone surpasses us in our ability to lead or teach? Or if someone is honored where we would like to be honored? Even more telling, he says, how do we feel when we become aware of such a person's being humbled? Self-importance is a cancerous sin, end quote. And it's all pride. So Jesus used an aphorism and he said, don't stop him, for the one who is not against you is for you. You know, the country we're living in today, the default setting is hate. You notice that? That's the default setting for everybody. It's just automatically hate. You know, this morning I was watching on television while I was trying to get ready to come to church and saw the news about O.J. Simpson being released from the jail in Las Vegas, and that the Attorney General of Florida had said he's not welcome in the state of Florida. Now, I'm not a politician. And if I was a politician and I got to make a difference, I'd make a bigger difference than some of the crazy people there are. But here's what I'm going to tell you. For a politician to make that statement, that's a default setting of hate. First of all, legally, she doesn't have that right to say that. And number two, what has happened to us? Listen, this may offend some people, but you have to know, O.J. Simpson is welcome at Crossroads. Now listen, no. If O.J. Simpson is not welcome at this church, this is not Jesus' church. No matter who you are. And listen, don't sit there and act all spiritual and say, well, you know, I've never done what O.J. Simpson's done. Listen, you don't know what he's done or what he hasn't done, but here's the deal. It's the grace of God that you and I get to be here. And all it is pride. All it is pride that causes people to do that stuff. And I just say, what has happened to our country? You know, you read the paper or you watch the media, and they tell us all that we hate each other. We can't stand each other. I mean, if you paid attention to the media, you'd think your neighbor was loading his guns right now to come over and blow your brains out. Really? That's not what I see. Now, I know I'm not everywhere and I'm not around everyone, but I don't see that. And I know we do live in the greatest state in the face of the earth, the state of Texas, and Texans are different. Thankfully, we ought to be. But listen, Christians ought to be different. We ought to be the ones that lead the way. We ought not get caught up. Listen, you don't have to participate in every argument you get invited to. I mean, that's nonsense. But you know what it is? It's pride, because we have to prove our point. And by the way, people that argue with you on Facebook or Twitter or wherever, you're not going to change their mind by your next post. Now, I'm not saying you can't stand up for the truth. You know, this past weekend, I posted something on Facebook about a lesbian bishop in the United Methodist Church who called Jesus a bigot. Now, friend, listen, when you start talking about Jesus, I'll never start a fight, but I'm not walking away from one either. And so I called her out on Facebook. I did it in a gracious way, but I want my friends, I want people who know me to know where I stand, and what she said is wrong. I'm not saying you can't stand up for the truth, but don't engage in mindless, stupid junior high arguments that do nothing except just inflame people. You know what we ought to do as Christians? We ought to go out of our way and say, you know what I'm going to do? This is a total stranger, but I'm going to treat them like one of my best friends. And I'm just going to go out of the way to be kind to everybody, and I'm going to be gracious to everybody, and I'm going to expect the best out of everybody instead of the worst. That's the exact opposite of pride. That's humility. And that's what ought to characterize Christians. You know, I love what Abraham Lincoln said one time. You will never hear this on the media. You'll never hear this on CNN, Fox News, whatever. You'll never see this in USA Today, but it's a true story about Abraham Lincoln. One time, some critics of his came after him because he was being too courteous and too kind to his enemies. And they reminded him, as President of the United States, it was his duty to destroy them. And he gave a great answer. You know what he said? He said, do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends? Now that's leadership. And we could use that at the White House. We could use that at your house and my house. We could use that everywhere. Listen, pride is what makes you think you're better than somebody else. Pride is what makes you look down on somebody else instead of helping them up. Pride is what makes you walk by a problem instead of fixing it. Pride is what makes you say, well, I'm just washing my hands, the whole thing. Well, get in line with Pilate. How'd that work for him? Pride. So Jesus' answer to him was a prohibition. Do not stop him. And a principle for the one who is not against you is for you. Remember September 11th? How many of you remember September 12th? Just a few? America was different. America was different. I've told the story before. I was driving down Cooper Street, and you have to turn left across 3 lanes of traffic to get into Sonic. And I always had to wait there until there was nobody there. And on September 12th, all 3 cars in all 3 lanes stopped to let me turn into Sonic. And I went, man, I love this. We were different. We were different. We realized after September 11th that on September 12th, we're all on the same team. But what's happened to us? We've allowed other people and we've allowed pride to convince us that we're not on the same team and we're all enemies and we're all against each other and we all hate each other. And friend, listen, that comes right out of the pit of hell. And Christians have got to stand up against that and say, no, that's not true. That's why we love it when people come here. Whenever we have a special speaker, they always say the same thing. I've never been in a more diverse church. How in the world did you guys ever get a church like that? I said, well, we didn't get a church like that. God gave us a church like that. It's never been you know who our target audience is? Whosoever will may come. We don't care who they are. We don't care what they've done. They're welcome. But pride stops all that. Pride's always worried about who's in first and who's getting credit and all that. You know, it's kind of like when Joshua ran to tell Moses. Remember those 2 guys were preaching? The 2 guys with the funny names, Eldad and Medad. You ever read that story? Numbers chapter 11. He ran to Moses and said, listen, Eldad and Medad, they're out there preaching and you know, they're stealing your thunder. And Moses said to him, are you jealous for my sake? He said, would that all the Lord's people were prophets and that the Lord would put his spirit on them. He said, I wish everybody was out there preaching. It'd make my job easier. Or how about when Paul was in prison and word came to him that there were some fellows out there taking advantage of the fact that he was in prison and they were preaching and they were stealing the hearts of the people and their motives weren't right. Remember what Paul said? He said, what then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in that I rejoice. He said, even if they're preaching with the wrong motive, at least they're preaching the gospel, and God's word will not return void. I rejoice in that. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, pride is not a virtue, it's a sin. And it's a deadly sin. If you forget everything else I said today, remember this. Pride thrills, then pride fills, and then pride kills. And listen, I've got indisputable, irrefutable evidence of the truth of that in my own life. I don't need to read a study. I don't need to see the research. I don't need to have other people's testimonies. I've seen enough times in my life when I've allowed pride in my life, and it thrills at first, and then it fills. But it always kills. Humility, on the other hand, Proverbs 22:4 says, it brings blessing and honor and life. In fact, one translation says it brings riches. That'll get some of your attention. Pride thrills, fills, and kills. Humility brings blessing and honor and life. Pride has no place in the life of a Christian. No place. Listen, when you see it, when you sense it, when you detect even the smallest bit of it, and by the way, it's always easy to see in somebody else's life than it is in your own. But listen, it's like some big old black spider on the wall. And for those of you who love bugs and all that, just don't listen to what I'm about to say. Kill the spider. I remember years ago, I was sleeping in a mosquito tent in Panama, literally the rainforest of Panama. And across the crocodile-infested river were all the Kuna Indians. And yes, it was a little hard to sleep, although the missionary told me, you'll be fine, you'll be fine. They love missionaries. I go, I'm not a missionary. I'm a minister. You know. He goes, you're fine. He goes, now, what you really need to worry about is the mosquitoes. Really? I got this mosquito net. I'm fine. All that. I went to bed. Pitch dark. There are no lights out there except we run with their generator. Generator's turned off for the night so it could all charge up again. And middle of the night, you know what I heard? Are you kidding me? I nearly tore that whole place apart trying to kill that mosquito. Finally, what I did, you know what I did? I don't know if this was very smart or not, but I just put the mosquito net up on top of this bed. so that it wouldn't stay in there. And when I didn't hear the buzz anymore, without turning on the lights, as if the mosquito could not see in the dark, I pulled the net back down. And I was laying there with my head on the pillow, and you know what I heard? Bzz, bzz, bzz. I went, oh, brother. He finally got me. I woke up in the morning, there was a big red whelp on my leg. Listen, if you see pride like that, if you sense pride like that buzzing around you, kill it. Or you'll wake up with some whelps all around you, your reputation, your heart, your friends, your family. Pride has no place in the life of a Christian. Proverbs 16:5 says, everyone who is arrogant or proud in heart is an abomination to the Lord. Be assured he will not go unpunished. Humility is the only way to be a Christian. Notice I didn't say be a great Christian or be a genuine Christian. Humility is the only way to be a Christian, period. Colossians 3:12, Paul says, put on then as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience. Don't put on a show to everybody else and try to hide your prideful heart. Put on compassionate hearts and kindness and humility and meekness and patience. Or how about this verse? Philippians chapter 2, verse 3. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit. Do nothing. But in humility, count others more significant than yourselves. You know what ought to happen on the way out here? There'd be a traffic jam at all the doors because no one's walking out. Everyone's going, no, you go first. No, you go first. No, you, seriously, you go first. When you get in the parking lot, same thing ought to happen. No, you all go ahead. Go ahead. I'm not in a hurry. Go ahead. I remember one time I was boarding a plane. I got upgraded to first class. Janice was with me, so she can attest to this really happening. And we were standing there in line, and there couldn't have been maybe this much space between us and this counter. And right as they said, we're boarding group number 1, this guy jumped in front of both of us. And I had another carnal response. I said, man, that was a great move. You ought to play for the Dallas Cowboys. He looked at me like, I should put your teeth in the back of your throat. You know, and I was just like, no. But I said, no, we're not in any hurry. Go ahead. We're going to fight about that. You ever notice how when you're not in a hurry, you can be a lot more gracious to people? I think that's part of our problem. We can't wait for the service to get over because we got something we got to go do, and we got to do this, and we're in a hurry all the time, and so we don't remember to put our faith into practice. Maybe we ought to post Philippians 2:3 on the social media this afternoon. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. That verse right there would change the United States of America. And that right there is the mark, the true mark, the genuine mark of greatness. Let's pray.